She moved through the airport the way anyone would at the end of a long week. A little tired, a little quiet, but calm and steady. She had done this many times before. The lines, the noise, the rolling suitcases, the announcements echoing over her head. None of it was new to her. She blended into the crowd on purpose, dressed in simple clothes and carrying only what she needed. To most people, she looked like any other traveler heading home. Still, she carried something few people there would ever know about. Inside her bag sat an identification card that carried a great deal of weight, proof of her service to the country. But she did not walk around showing it. She was not the type to demand attention or special treatment. She believed that respect should come from how people treat one another, not from a title or job. So she stood in line like everyone else, patient and polite, happy to be just another face in the crowd. The airport buzzed with its usual energy. Children laughed and chased each other near the windows. A group of friends spoke excitedly about a beach trip. Business travelers typed quickly on laptops, trying to squeeze work into every spare moment. The smell of coffee drifted from a nearby cafe, and the soft hum of rolling suitcases formed a steady rhythm under it all. She watched it with a small smile. Travel can be stressful, but it also shows how many different lives are moving at the same time, all crossing paths for a moment before separating again. She reached the security checkpoint and waited her turn. When it came, she greeted the staff with a warm, "Hello?" placing her bag and jacket into the plastic bins. She followed every direction carefully, not because she had to but because she respected the process. When the officer looked at her identification, he nodded and waved her through with a simple, professional word. There was nothing special about that moment. It was quick, ordinary, routine the way she liked it. After security, she checked the screen for her gate and took the long walk down the terminal. She thought about the week behind her, the meetings, the discussions, the way every decision seemed to carry 100 more just like it. It was meaningful work, yes, but also heavy. On this trip, she had chosen to travel alone, without staff or attention. It gave her time to breathe, to think, and to remember the people she represented. She stopped at a small shop to buy a bottle of water and a snack. The cashier gave her a friendly smile. They spoke briefly about the weather and how busy the airport seemed that day. These small conversations always grounded her. It reminded her that beyond the speeches and votes and long hours, she was still just a person living day by day like everyone else. When she reached the gate, people were already sitting and waiting. Some scrolled on phones. Others read books or rested their eyes. She found a seat near the window and watched the planes roll across the runway. The sky stretched wide and open, a soft blue fading into thin clouds. For a moment, she forgot about schedules and deadlines. She simply enjoyed the view, grateful for the quiet. She thought about home, about familiar streets, favorite meals, and the people she loved. She pictured arriving late in the evening, dropping her bag near the door, and letting out that long, soft breath that only comes when you finally reach a safe place. The thought made her smile again. Home was not just a location. It was a feeling of belonging, of resting, of being seen for who you really are. As boarding time drew closer, more passengers arrived, filling the space with movement and sound. The staff at the gate spoke over the intercom, reminding everyone about boarding groups and carry-on rules. She gathered her things and waited for her group to be called. She did not rush forward or hover near the desk. She simply sat and waited, as she always did, trusting the process and respecting others' space. From time to time, she noticed small interactions around her. A man helped an older woman lift her bag onto a seat. A mother soothed her baby with a soft song. Two strangers laughed together after realizing they were heading to the same city for the same event. These tiny moments of kindness reminded her why she loved serving people. Even in a busy place like an airport, humanity showed up in quiet, gentle ways. She adjusted her jacket and checked her phone for messages, then tucked it away again. The truth was, she enjoyed the simple stillness. It was one of the few times in her life where she was not expected to speak, decide, or lead. Here, she was just a traveler among travelers, waiting for her flight. Her seat was not in first class, and that was by choice. She did not believe her job made her more important than anyone else. She believed that true respect was about listening, caring, and seeing people as equals. So she preferred to stay among the crowd, to hear the real conversations, to stay grounded in the world she served. As the gate agents prepared for boarding, they spoke quickly to one another, busy with their tasks. She did not pay much attention at first. She was used to busy environments and understood that people in customer service had long days too. She always tried to treat staff with patience and kindness. That had been her way long before she ever held public office. She glanced at her boarding pass one more time, making sure she was in the right place and group. Everything looked correct. She slipped the pass back into her hand, ready to move when called. Around her, the line began to form, first for passengers who needed extra time, then for the early boarding groups. She stayed seated until her group was announced, never wanting to crowd the line or make things harder for others. While she waited, she remembered something her family had always told her. That character is shown in the small moments, not the big ones. Anyone could act kind when the spotlight was on. The real test came when no one was watching. That lesson had shaped her life. It was why she still said please and thank you, why she still held doors open, and why she still believed that every person deserves dignity. In that waiting area, no one knew who she was. To them, she was just another person holding a ticket and hoping the flight would be on time. And she was more than fine with that. She valued those rare moments of anonymity because they reminded her of where she came from. Ordinary roots, ordinary days, ordinary hopes. The airport speaker chimed, and another announcement echoed through the gate. She took a deep breath and stood up slowly, feeling the familiar mix of travel fatigue and quiet peace. She straightened her bag on her shoulder and stepped into line with the others in her group. There was nothing flashy or loud about the way she carried herself. She moved with calm confidence, grounded and steady. As the line inched forward, she noticed a few people looking tired, a little stressed, and she offered small smiles when their eyes met. Sometimes that was all people needed, a simple sign of kindness. She believed that leadership was not just about laws and speeches, but about how you treat the person standing right next to you. She was ready for an ordinary flight. A seat by the window, a soft hum of engines, and maybe a short nap. She did not know that this simple moment at the gate would soon become something very different. Something that would test how people saw her and how they treated others. But in that instant, she was just another traveler, patient, hopeful, and focused on getting home. And as she waited for the staff to scan her boarding pass, she carried with her the same quiet strength she carried into every room, every meeting, every challenge. She did not need to announce who she was. She believed that true worth is not measured by titles but by actions. And in the middle of that crowded airport, with luggage rolling past and voices echoing all around, she stood as a reminder, even if no one else knew it yet, that every person holds a story, and every story deserves respect. She waited in the line with calm patience, the boarding pass warm in her hand from being held so long. The voices around her blended into a soft wave of sound. Announcements, quiet chatter, the soft roll of suitcase wheels. It was all part of the normal airport song. She wasn't thinking about anything dramatic. She was only thinking about finding her seat, storing her bag, and letting the day slow down for a while. When it was finally her turn to step forward, she gave the same gentle smile she always offered in public spaces. The gate counter stood between her and the jet bridge like a small checkpoint on the way to rest. The staff member behind the desk seemed busy and tired. Papers were stacked everywhere. A radio crackled. The person scanned the boarding passes with quick, practiced motions. She held out her pass, polite and ready. The staff member glanced at it, then at her, and the expression shifted in a small but clear way. Not surprise, not confusion, something else. Something sharp, like a tiny stone underfoot. The tone of voice that came next sounded different from the ones used with the people ahead of her. Less warm, less patient. "Are you sure you're in the right group?" the staff member asked, eyebrows lifting just enough to send a message. She stayed calm. "Yes," she said softly. "This is my group." The staff member gave a little laugh that was not friendly. It was the kind people use when they think someone doesn't belong. The sound floated in the air a moment too long. A second staff member leaned in, curious, looking her up and down in a way that made her feel less like a person and more like a problem that needed solving. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. Instead, she simply held the boarding pass steady and waited. She had spent years learning how to stay composed in uncomfortable moments. Even now, when the tone felt wrong and the air grew heavy, she chose calm. "Let me see that again," the second staff member said, already sounding annoyed. They took the pass from her fingers, as though expecting to prove her wrong. The first staff member rolled their eyes, not openly rude, but not kind either. Their faces seemed to say, "You must be mistaken." People around them shifted, sensing tension without knowing why. A few passengers pretended not to watch but still listened. She stood there, the line behind her slowing, but she kept breathing steady. Her heart did not race. This was not the first time she had been doubted. Still hurt, but it no longer surprised her. The staff member typed something into the computer, sighing loudly, as if this was an inconvenience caused by her. "This is priority boarding," the person said at last, almost challenging her. "Yes," she replied gently. The second staff member gave a small smirk. "Do you have some other proof? Like another ID? Or something that explains this?" They said it lightly, like a joke, but she felt the sting anyway. The question was not really about the ticket. It was about her, the way she looked, the way they expected her to be. It was as if they had already decided she didn't belong, and now they were looking for a reason to make that decision sound official. She paused for a heartbeat. She could have reacted. She could have demanded to see a supervisor or spoken sharply about respect. But she didn't. She had learned long ago that anger often closed doors, while calm sometimes opened them. So she chose patience once again. "My ticket is correct," she said softly. "I'm happy to wait while you check." Her voice was steady, but inside she felt a familiar ache. It was the quiet sadness that comes when people judge without knowing the first thing about you. She knew others in the airport had likely felt that same feeling. Being doubted, being talked down to, being treated as less than they were. The gate area continued to buzz, but to her it felt like the noise had softened. She became aware of the weight of her bag on her shoulder, the cool air against her skin, the faint hum of the scanner. She noticed a child nearby watching everything with wide eyes, not understanding but sensing the shift in mood. The first staff member leaned over the counter, voice lowering but still carrying a hint of mockery. "We just want to make sure," they said, as if the situation were somehow amusing. She nodded. Of course. She didn't explain who she was. She didn't mention her work, her role, or the long road that had taken her from ordinary routes to national service. She believed that respect should not depend on a title. It should exist because people are human. The seconds stretched longer than they should have. The staff shuffled papers, clicked keys harder than necessary, and traded glances that said more than words. One raised a brow. Another gave a half-smile that was not kind. If anyone else had stepped up with the same ticket, she wondered if the tone would have been warmer, more trusting. Still, she held her place with grace. She breathed in and out, letting the moment pass through her instead of breaking her. It was a habit she had built from years of experience, not pretending something didn't hurt, but not letting it take over. Behind her, the line continued to grow. People shuffled. A few sighed under their breath, not at her, but at the delay. She felt a small urge to apologize, even though she had done nothing wrong. That's what unfairness often does. It tries to make people feel responsible for the burden placed on them. At last, the computer beeped. The boarding pass was valid. It always had been. The staff member's face shifted again, this time to embarrassment mixed with stubborn pride. Instead of an apology, the tone turned stiff and formal, as if that could erase the way the earlier words had landed. "Fine," the person said. "You can go ahead." But she didn't move right away. Not because she wanted to argue, but because she wanted to make sure the moment didn't pass without meaning. She met their eyes, not with anger, not with shame, but with steady honesty. "Thank you," she said quietly. There was so much behind those two words. Gratitude, yes, but also a gentle reminder. The situation could have been handled with simple kindness from the start. She walked forward toward the jet bridge, her steps calm and even. But the moment stayed in the air behind her like a faint echo. The staff leaned back from the counter, suddenly serious. The people who had watched looked thoughtful, some even a little uncomfortable. They had seen the difference in tone. They had heard the edge in the staff's voices. They had witnessed how easily someone could be doubted for no clear reason. As she made her way down the narrow hallway toward the plane, she let herself feel the full weight of what had just happened. Not to carry it as anger, but to remember it as truth. Even with her quiet strength, even with all she had achieved, she could still be treated as if she did not belong. And if this happened to her, she could only imagine how often it happened to people with fewer resources or less confidence to stand their ground. But she didn't let the experience harden her heart. She believed deeply that the answer to unfairness was not bitterness but clarity, compassion, and courage. She carried those with her like invisible luggage, always present, always ready when needed. The jet bridge smelled faintly of metal and air conditioning. The sound of the plane grew louder as she neared the door. A flight attendant waited with a welcoming smile, and for a moment the tension melted away. She returned the smile, grateful for the kindness. As she stepped onto the plane, she thought not about power or pride but about the simple truth that every person deserves respect. Whether dressed in a suit or in casual clothes, whether known or unknown, whether holding an important title or not. She found her seat slowly, letting others pass by, careful not to block the aisle. She placed her bag overhead, settled in, and rested her hands on her lap. From the outside, she looked like any other traveler beginning a flight. But inside, a quiet story was unfolding. One that would soon reveal more than anyone at that gate had expected. For now, though, she closed her eyes for a moment and breathed. She did not plan to hold on to anger. She planned to hold on to purpose, the purpose of showing, in every moment she could, that dignity is not something given by a title or taken away by a tone of voice. It lives in the way people treat each other, especially when they think no one important is watching. And in that simple seat, surrounded by strangers and the soft murmur of boarding, she prepared for whatever came next, carrying her calm strength with her like a quiet light. She sat quietly in her seat for a few minutes, letting her breathing return to a slow, steady rhythm. The hum of the plane, the shuffle of passengers finding their places, and the soft voice of the flight attendant created a calm background. But inside, the moment at the gate still lingered. She did not want it to ruin her peace, yet it stayed with her like a faint echo that would not fade. More passengers boarded. Some looked hurried, some looked worn out, some looked excited for whatever waited at the other end of the flight. She watched them with gentle eyes, as she always did. She had a way of looking at people that saw past the surface. She wondered what stories they carried. Families, work, dreams, quiet struggles. Everyone had something, even if they never spoke it out loud. After a short while, the same gate staff who had spoken to her stepped onto the plane. They looked around the cabin and then walked toward her row. It was clear they were looking for her. Their faces were a mix of uncertainty and strain, like people who had made a mistake, but were not sure how to step back from it. She looked up with calm kindness, not coldness. She refused to let bitterness decide her tone. The first staff member took a slow breath and spoke, trying to sound polite now. "Ma'am, we just wanted to double-check something about your ticket," the person said carefully. There it was again, the question under the question. But this time she felt a steady strength rise within her. Not anger, not pride, just truth. "Of course," she said gently. "I can help with that." She reached into her bag, not in a rush, not making a scene. She knew what she carried inside. It was not simply a card. It was a symbol of years of work, long days, long nights, and the trust of millions of people. Still, she handled it as she always did, with quiet respect. Her hand closed around the familiar shape of her identification. For a second she paused, thinking about the meaning of what she was about to do. She had never been the type to flash her position to get special treatment. She believed deeply that every person, no matter their job, deserved the same level of respect she hoped to receive. But this moment was not only about her. It was about something larger, a mirror being held up to behavior that needed to be seen clearly. She pulled out the card and handed it to the staff member with steady hands. "This might answer your questions," she said, her voice soft but firm. The staff member took the card and looked at it. The change was instant. The eyes widened ever so slightly. The body stiffened. The room, or at least the space around them, seemed to grow still. The second staff member leaned closer, reading the words on the card. United States Senator. Their expressions shifted from doubt to shock, then to the uneasy weight of realization. It was as if all the earlier words and tones replayed in their minds at once, and now they saw them under a bright light. The passengers in nearby rows noticed too. They did not know the full story, but they could feel that something important was taking place. The staff member swallowed hard and handed the card back with both hands, a new respect in the gesture. I see," the person said, voice suddenly careful. "Thank you for showing that. I apologize for the confusion." But she knew it had not really been about confusion. It had been about assumption. Still, she chose kindness over triumph. She took back the card and placed it slowly into her wallet. "Thank you," she replied softly. Her tone carried grace, but it also carried truth. She did not rub it in. She did not scold. Yet the message rose clearly in the silence. Respect should not begin only when a title is revealed. The second staff member tried to add something, searching for the right words. We didn't realize who you were." She gave a small, gentle nod. "I understand," she said. "But also remember, you don't need to know who someone is to treat them with care." There was no anger in the way she said it, just a simple human reminder. One that stayed in the air like a lesson written in soft ink. The staff members both nodded slowly. Their expressions softened from stiff embarrassment to something real, reflection, maybe even regret. It is never easy to face our own blind spots, yet in that moment they did. They saw how quickly they had judged. They saw how tone and body language can change when status enters the picture. And they saw the quiet dignity of the woman in front of them, who did not use her position to shame them, but to teach. "Thank you for your patience," one of them added. She smiled, and it was a true smile. "Safe travels to all of us," she said gently. They walked back toward the front of the plane, quieter than before. The passengers who had witnessed the scene looked down at their hands or out the window, each lost in thought. No one spoke loudly. No one laughed. The cabin felt different, not tense, but thoughtful. She leaned back in her seat and looked out the small oval window. The sky outside was pale and wide, waiting for the plane to rise into it. She thought about how often people are judged before they are known. She thought about the people who face doubt every single day, not for what they've done wrong, but simply for who they are or how they look. Many of them do not carry a card that can change the tone of a conversation in a single second. Many of them walk through the world with quiet strength, even when the world does not see it. She felt gratitude for the trust placed in her role, but she also felt a deep sense of responsibility. If her title could open eyes, then maybe it could open hearts as well. But she never wanted the lesson to be, treat people well because they might be important. She wanted it to be, treat people well because they are human. The engines grew louder as the final passengers took their seats. A flight attendant went through the safety instructions with a warm, steady voice. She listened politely, even though she had heard the same words dozens of times. Respect, she believed, was not selective. It was a way of moving through the world. As the plane began to taxi, she folded her hands in her lap and let the moment settle inside her. She did not replay it in anger. Instead, she turned it over gently in her mind, the way you might turn over a stone to see what lies beneath it. There was something powerful in seeing how quickly attitudes shift when a title appears. But there was also hope in the way the staff members' faces changed, from amusement to awareness. Growth begins there, in the quiet places where people recognize they could have done better. She thought back to the times in her life when others had given her grace. Teachers who believed in her. Neighbors who encouraged her. Mentors who reminded her that staying kind in hard moments was not a sign of weakness, but of deep strength. Those memories gave her balance. They were reminders that while the world can sometimes wound, it can also heal. Soon the plane lifted off the ground, rising smoothly into the open sky. The city below shrank to tiny lines and shapes, and the clouds wrapped the aircraft in soft white light. She watched the view with calm eyes. Up here, above the rush and noise, everything looked simple and gentle. She took out a small notebook, one she carried not for speeches or official notes, but for personal thoughts. She wrote a few quiet lines, not naming the airline or the staff, not blaming, just reflecting. Words about respect, words about patience, words about the hidden stories every person carries. Then she closed the notebook and rested it on her lap. She did not plan to post or share it. It was enough that the lesson stayed alive in her heart. A flight attendant passed by and offered water. She accepted with a grateful smile. The kindness felt extra bright after the earlier tension. It reminded her that even in one short journey, the full range of human behavior appears. Misunderstanding, awakening, apology, connection. She sipped the water slowly and looked around the cabin. People were settling in, reading, resting, talking softly. Life, in all its ordinary beauty, had returned to its calm flow, and she felt at peace again. She knew the moment of reveal would not define her. What would define her was how she handled it, with dignity, patience, and a deep belief in the worth of every single person. That belief was the real badge she carried, more important than any card in her wallet. The plane moved steadily forward through the sky, and she closed her eyes for a short rest. Outside, the clouds drifted like quiet guardians. Inside, a gentle strength filled her, reminding her that even small interactions can hold great meaning, and that kindness, once shown, has a way of traveling far beyond the place where it began. She woke from her short rest as the plane steadied high above the clouds. The cabin was quiet except for the soft hum of the engines and the low voices of a few passengers talking to one another. She took a slow breath and let it out, feeling more centered than before. The moment with the staff was behind her now, yet the meaning of it still rested gently in her thoughts. After a while, the fasten seatbelt sign turned off. People moved about the aisle, stretching their legs or heading toward the back of the plane. A flight attendant stopped by to ask if she needed anything. The kindness in the voice felt real, not forced, and she thanked them warmly. She always tried to return kindness with kindness, because she believed that even small gentle moments matter. Then she noticed something. One of the staff from the gate had taken a seat at the very front for a short time. Their posture looked stiff, hands folded too carefully, jaw tight with thought. It was the look of someone replaying a moment over and over again, wishing they could rewind the day and make a different choice. She recognized that look because she had worn it many times in her own life. A few minutes later, the staff member made their way down the aisle. When they reached her row, they paused. "Ma'am," they said softly, "may I speak with you for a moment?" She looked up with calm eyes. "Of course." The staff member knelt slightly so their voice would not carry to the whole cabin. The tone was very different from before. There was no edge now, no smirk, only honesty. "I want to apologize," the person said. "Earlier at the gate, the way we spoke to you, it wasn't right." She listened without interrupting. She knew how hard it can be to admit mistakes, especially in front of strangers. "We shouldn't have questioned you like that. And we definitely shouldn't have changed our attitude only after we saw your ID." The words came slowly, like they had been carefully chosen from a place of reflection. This wasn't a quick, automatic apology. It was the kind that grows after a real look in the mirror. She nodded gently. "Thank you for saying that." The staff member looked down for a moment, then back at her. "The truth is, sometimes people get so used to rushing and checking boxes that they forget they're talking to real people. That's not an excuse. It's just, the world moves fast and we don't always slow down enough to see what we're doing." She could hear the sincerity, and instead of feeling triumphant, she felt compassion. She had made mistakes too. Many. The difference came from what you chose to do after you saw them. "I appreciate your honesty," she said softly. "I know the job can be stressful. But the way we treat people, especially in small moments, matters a lot. The staff member nodded, eyes softening. You're right, and I'm sorry it took your title for us to realize that. You deserved respect from the beginning. She paused for a second, choosing her words carefully. Everyone deserves that, she said. Not just me. Not just people with certain jobs. Every single person who passes through that gate. Those words settled between them like a quiet truth. Simple, clear, human. The staff member swallowed, then gave a small, grateful nod. Thank you, they said again. I'm going to remember this. Truly. I hope you do, she replied with kindness, not as a warning but as a wish. They exchanged a gentle smile. It was a real smile this time, one that showed growth, not pride. Then the staff member stood and slowly walked back up the aisle, looking lighter than before, as if some heavy knot inside had loosened. She turned her gaze back to the window. The clouds looked like soft fields stretching forever. Up here, everything seemed peaceful and wide, like there was enough space for mistakes, learning, forgiveness, and change. She believed the world needed more of all four. A little later, the captain's voice filled the cabin with a calm announcement. The plane would land soon. Passengers began to gather their things, closing books and shutting off screens. The mood on the plane felt ordinary again, yet she sensed something different, a shared quietness. Maybe others had seen the small moment of apology and reflection. Maybe it had touched them too. As the plane descended, she felt a warmth in her chest. Not happiness that she had revealed her title, not satisfaction that the staff had been humbled, but relief that the moment had become a lesson instead of a wound. Relief that dignity had been restored not with anger, but with truth spoken gently. The landing was smooth. When the plane reached the gate and the seatbelt sign turned off, people stood and reached for their bags. She waited as she always did, letting others go first. There was no need to rush. Life had taught her that patience often leads to calmer hearts. As she waited, a passenger from across the aisle leaned slightly toward her. I saw what happened earlier, they said in a soft voice. You handled it with a lot of grace. She smiled kindly. Thank you. I try. The passenger nodded. It really made me think about how I talk to people. It's easy to forget that every person has a story. I think about that a lot too, she replied. They exchanged another warm smile before turning back to their own bags. It was a short moment but meaningful. Sometimes the most important change doesn't happen on big stages. It happens in quiet spaces between strangers who suddenly understand each other a little more. When it was finally her turn to leave the plane, she stepped into the aisle and walked toward the exit with steady steps. The staff from earlier stood near the door. Their expression carried that same thoughtful respect as before. Safe travels, ma'am, they said gently. And to you, she replied with an open heart. She stepped off the plane and into the bright light of the jet bridge. The air felt fresh. The noise of the airport returned. Rolling luggage, distant voices, echoing announcements. But now it felt softer, less heavy. The moment had passed, but the meaning remained. As she moved through the terminal, she reflected on what had happened. It would have been so easy to react with anger, easy to shame, easy to demand. But she had chosen a different path. And because of that, the moment had turned into something better, a mirror, a lesson, a chance for everyone involved to grow. She thought about the people she served back home. Many of them faced doubt and misunderstanding daily without the shield of a powerful title. She carried them with her in spirit wherever she went. They were the reason she tried to meet the world with patience and courage. They were the reason she believed so deeply in fairness. Outside the airport, the sky stretched wide again, this time at ground level. Cars moved in lines. Families hugged. Travelers hurried past with new stories to tell. She stood for a moment, simply watching life unfold. It reminded her that the world was always teaching, always learning, always moving. She took another slow breath. This experience had not broken her calm. Instead, it had deepened her purpose. She wanted to continue living in a way that showed dignity without bragging, strength without harshness, and truth without cruelty. She headed toward the exit, ready to continue her journey. The day had not gone exactly as expected. But sometimes the unexpected moments reveal the most. About others and about ourselves. And as she walked into the fresh air, she carried with her a quiet hope that the people who had met her that day would move through the world a little more gently, seeing the humanity in every face. Not because they might be important, but because they already are. The next morning felt quieter than usual at the airport. People still hurried across the wide floors, rolling bags behind them and checking departure boards. But there was a different mood around the check-in counters. Word had spread. Not everyone knew every detail, but enough staff had heard what happened with the woman who turned out to be a United States senator. Some felt shocked, some felt embarrassed, and some, honestly, felt nervous about what would come next. The woman herself woke up before sunrise, as she normally did. She sat by the hotel window with a cup of tea and looked out at the early glow over the city. It had been a long night after the airline called, apologized again, and promised an internal review. But her mind wasn't on anger. Her thoughts were on what could be learned from all of it. She had spent many years talking about fairness and respect, not just for people with titles but for everyone. And now she had lived through a moment that showed exactly why that mattered. She took a slow breath and whispered to herself that she didn't want revenge. She wanted growth. Later that day, she returned to the airport not to make a scene, but because the airline had asked to meet. They wanted to talk face to face. The meeting took place in a small conference room tucked behind the check-in area. The walls were plain, the table simple, but everyone sitting around it understood the importance of what they were about to discuss. The supervisor spoke first. Her voice was careful and open. She admitted the mistakes made by the staff. She spoke about tone, about assumptions, about the way a person can forget that every traveler is a human being with a story, a life and feelings that matter. She did not try to make excuses. The staff member who had spoken down to the woman also sat there. He looked uneasy. His hands were folded, and every now and then he glanced at the floor. When it was his turn, his voice shook a little. He said he was sorry. He said he hadn't meant harm, but he knew that didn't really matter because harm still happened. He talked about how he had grown too used to rushing, judging, and reacting instead of listening. The senator listened calmly. She didn't interrupt. She didn't raise her voice. When they finished, she leaned forward, rested her hands on the table, and spoke softly. She talked about how easy it is to forget kindness when life feels busy. She spoke about how people sometimes judge others because of how they look, how they speak, or what they think they know about someone. And then she explained how that judgment can leave a lasting mark. She made sure to say something important. It wasn't about special treatment because of her title. It was about equal treatment because of her humanity. The room felt still for a moment after she finished. The weight of her words didn't need loud sound to be heard. The airline promised change. Real change. Not just a memo or a quick training video. They spoke about workshops, open discussions, and listening sessions where staff could share their feelings, and also learn from guests who had felt ignored, dismissed, or misunderstood. Weeks passed, and slowly things did change. At that same airport, travelers began to notice small differences. A friendly smile at the counter. A patient pause while someone searched for a passport in a crowded bag. A kind tone when a flyer seemed confused. They were small moments, but they added up. The woman went back to her normal life of meetings, speeches, and long hours reading through bills and letters from people across the country. But this moment stayed with her. Sometimes, in the evening, when everything was quiet, she thought again about the airport scene. Not with bitterness, but with a sense of purpose. She realized how important it was that she had chosen calm over anger, firmness over shouting, respect over revenge, because her response shaped what followed. The story didn't remain a loud news item for very long. The world moved on to the next headline as it always does. But beneath the surface, in the real lives of real people, the impact kept growing. One day, months later, a young trainee at the same airline sat in a backroom classroom with a small group of new hires. On the screen in front of them, they saw a training lesson built around empathy and respect. The instructor spoke about the power of words and tone. about how you never know who stands in front of you. A teacher, a parent, a veteran, an artist, or yes, even a senator, but that it should not matter. Every person deserves dignity. The trainee raised a hand and asked where the training came from. The instructor told the story carefully, leaving out names and details, but explaining the heart of it. A traveler had been judged unfairly, and instead of fighting with anger, she met the moment with grace. And because of that, change began. The trainee looked thoughtful. The lesson landed. Meanwhile, the woman continued her work in the capital. One afternoon, she spoke at a community event. Her voice was warm and steady as she shared stories about policy, education, and opportunity. Afterward, a woman from the audience came up and said she had heard a version of the airport story. She thanked the senator for showing strength without cruelty. The senator smiled and said something simple. Kindness is not weakness. It's a choice. That sentence stayed in the listener's mind long after. In quiet ways, the story also helped the airline reflect on the pressure its workers faced. The company added short breaks to shifts. They created a small lounge where staff could sit for a few minutes, breathe, and reset. They encouraged workers to support each other, not just rush through the day. When people feel respected at work, it becomes easier for them to respect others. The man who had mocked the traveler began volunteering for a community group that helped new flyers understand airports better. He greeted them with patience. He listened. Over time, he grew more aware of the habits he needed to change. Growth doesn't always happen overnight, but it does happen when someone truly tries. As for the senator, she didn't often talk about the incident in public. When she did, she spoke gently and focused on the lesson, not the drama. She believed stories should lift people, not tear them down. And so the final part of the story is not loud. It is not filled with shouting crowds or big speeches. Instead, it is filled with quiet moments. A staff member saying, "How can I help?" in a warm voice. A traveler feeling seen instead of ignored. A manager reminding a team that every person counts. The woman continued traveling, sometimes through that same airport. And each time, she walked calmly through the terminal, not as a symbol or headline, but as a human being among other human beings. The world didn't suddenly become perfect. There were still bad days, still mistakes, still tired moments when someone forgot kindness. But now there was also awareness, and that awareness mattered. Because in the end, this wasn't really a story about someone pulling out an ID. It was a story about what happens after, about humility, growth, and the simple truth that respect should never depend on a title. It should simply be there from one person to another. And that is how the story rests. Not with anger, but with a reminder. A reminder that the way we treat people in the small, everyday moments can shape more than we realize.